Hi, welcome back. This is Adam Wolf, physical therapist. We've been talking about integrated motion and how it ties into motor control. This week I wanted to continue that conversation a little bit on how I use motor control principles of how well the nervous system is connected to specific regions of tissue and how I tie that to integrated motion. So my guy Tim here is going to help out. And so let's say, for example, that somebody you're working with that has a shoulder impingement or some sort. It's a pinchy shoulder. When they raise up, maybe they've got some pinching on the front or the side, or what we'll deem closing angle pinching in the joint. And if you're not familiar with what a closing angle pinch is, I suggest you research functional range conditioning a little bit. Dr. Andreas Bina talks a lot about that. Basically, the idea is a joint to space between bones, and if this is my elbow joint and I'm bending my elbow, my closing angle is the bicep side and the opening angle is the tricep side. Closing angle pinching is really bad anywhere in the joint, anywhere in the body. So when I look up and I feel it in the back, if I look to the side and I feel it here and not here, when I flex my hip and I feel it in the front, not the back, that is not a stretch. That is a capsular or joint restriction, and so we want to work with that. So we've got this person who maybe has that pinchy shoulder when he goes through motion, whichever it is, closing angle pinch. And when we've assessed, and I've looked, and remember we talked this to tie together, last week we were talking of transformational zones, and that point in time when the body stops loading and begins to go the other way or explode, that point in time of transformation. There's, remember, in movement is a sequential dissociation of body segments. So if the two bones move in the same speed, in the same direction, the joint doesn't always feel anything. And so a lot of times what I'll look at in shoulder, I'll just have somebody go through a little bit of shoulder flexion. I'll tie the hips in. So Tim, put your right foot forward softly, and you're just going to sort of drive your right knee forward a little bit as you're reaching your left foot up overhead. Yeah, so I can do that. And as we do that, I'm looking at shoulder blade motion. Okay, and so again, if I'm looking at the shoulder glenohumeral joint, I would want to see like how well one bone moves against the other. Do they go at the same speed? Let's say, for example, a lot of times somebody that has a pinchy shoulder, you'll find that as they're going through this, the shoulder and the humerus and the scapula are going at the same speed. And so we've deemed that maybe we want to get one going faster or slower based on that 2-to-1 rule that we've learned in school. And if you're not familiar with that, check it out. Okay. The way I tie it to motor control, now I know in the transformational zone there should be the sequence of dissociation. Perhaps there's not. I like, if there's pain in a region, personally I muscle test. And when I say muscle test, I'm not looking at a Kendall and Kendall 5 out of 5 muscle test. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about more of a light muscle test as an indicator into how well the nervous system can maybe engage that tissue. I know there's a lot of debate around whether or not there's value in that, but for me, to do that, tying it into a bunch of other objective measurements is a great way for the patient and for myself to see how well we're responding and see if we can change some short-term pain levels. Because even though recognizing that if I can change short-term pain levels, if I can rub on you or play with the way your nervous system engages muscles and that changes your input into the tissue, that tells me that there is an opportunity for improvement and that is that pain is really in your tissue. If I can change it that quickly, that tells me this is more of a nervous system modulation. And so let's say, for example, as we're sitting here with Tim, you go ahead and have a seat here, you're a little taller than me. I'm going to test the muscles around his shoulder. I typically start around 18 inches. I'm just going to test these muscles, and Tim and I know that this shoulder is a little bit weaker than the other. So when I test this muscle, meet my pressure here, push into my hand, he's not able to sort of sustain that contraction. Hold on, push this here. He sort of searches forward and revs it up versus the other side when I test over here. Go ahead and meet my pressure. Don't beat me, just keep it here. Hold it here for me. Meet my pressure, push in. He can just keep that here as we're holding. On the other side, there's a little bit of a searching for it. Hold this here, meet my pressure. There's a little bit of a searching. I'm not pushing harder. I have a system in my clinic called a micro-fed. It's a handheld force plate. I know what 10 to 12 pounds of pressure is. You could see the difference, and Tim could, I know he's chewing gum. Maybe that makes a difference, maybe not. That's not what we're talking about right now. There are protocols out there which we're not going to talk about. There's many to sort of tie together maybe why that's happening. If you can't connect, let's say, and you're searching, theoretically that's a less connected tissue. And if there's a less connected tissue, that means that there's probably reciprocally maybe making it less connected because something's too connected. And so I can play with that. One of the things that's proven very valuable to me, especially in people that have that closing angle restriction, it doesn't matter where it is after I test those muscles, I want to see how they respond to compression or distraction. Sometimes that tight joint, that the tissue's tight and you've got that capsular pinch, sometimes your nervous system is holding it tight because it's a physiological tight joint. Sometimes your nervous system, in my opinion, holds it neurologically tight because it's seeking stability in other areas. And for me, this muscle testing to tell how we respond to compression and distraction is a really good insight into that. So sometimes what you'll see, and we're just going to keep it at this tissue right here, when I can test it here, meet my pressure, hold it here, he's not able to engage it at that, like, roughly whatever pressure I'm going at. I'm going to say roughly 10 pounds. I can just distract. I'm just adding a long axis distraction here to change and play with proprioceptors and how well he connects, and then I can retest that muscle, hold it, and you could feel, Tim, that that's a little bit more engaged there, versus if I go ahead and just compress it and stimulate other proprioceptors which respond to compression, hold this here, push into my hand, and you could see that it's a little less connected. So for me, let's say you've got an impinged joint, just distract it again, hold this here, push into my hand, we respond, and when we compress the joint a little bit, hold it here, meet my pressure, you're not able to. So for me, that's really valuable, because if I'm going to mobilize that joint and create space, I would theoretically do it now because you responded more to that distraction. Doesn't always work that way, though. Sometimes you're going to compress and it's going to go stronger, and you're going to distract and it's going to go weaker. And for me, that's a tissue, or that's a joint that's not that's neurologically holding the joint tight. It wants compression to feel stable, and so a lot of times the answer is strengthening all the muscles around the joint, still work on motion and creating the correct one bone moving against the other, but without sort of, in my head, pulling it apart. So hopefully that was helpful for you. It probably led to more questions. Hopefully it did, because this now leads into our April discussion, which is really going to be around motor control a little bit more. We're going to dive farther into it. There are so many different techniques out there, and I've had the opportunity to study a number of them and how we can tie it together. For more questions, check out my blog, Adam Wolf PT. Tim, thanks, man.
Thank you.
See you soon.